Ma'am, step out of the truck and keep your hands where I can see them. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness and landed squarely across Monica Hayes's windshield, turning the quiet stretch of interstate into something tense and unfamiliar, the kind of silence that didn't belong to empty highways but to moments right before something shifted. Monica's hands remained steady on the steering wheel as the low rumble of her 18-wheeler idled beneath her, the engine humming like a slow heartbeat after 14 straight hours on the road, the dashboard glowing soft amber across her tired eyes. She had just crossed the state line 20 minutes earlier, hauling refrigerated produce from Amarillo toward Nashville, the trailer temperature locked at 38 degrees, paperwork clean, route logged, everything by the book. The highway around her stretched flat and dark, mile markers fading into the distance, nothing but open Texas land, and the faint shimmer of heat still rising off the asphalt even after midnight. She reached up calmly and flipped the engine off, and the sudden quiet felt louder than the truck had been, the ticking metal cooling under the hood echoing in the still air. Red and blue lights pulsed behind her cab, reflecting across the chrome mirrors, across the polished steel of the trailer, across the road like waves of color washing over empty pavement. Monica exhaled slowly, her breath steady, her shoulders relaxed, the kind of composure that didn't come from practice but from years of learning how to remain calm when everyone else expected tension. She glanced at the side mirror and counted 2 patrol SUVs parked at angles behind her, another cruiser rolling up slowly from the shoulder, the gravel crunching softly beneath its tires. 3 vehicles. 3 officers. For a routine stop. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not with fear, but with quiet awareness, the same instinct that had followed her long before she ever sat behind a commercial steering wheel. She reached toward the center console, her movements deliberate and unhurried, and turned on the interior cab light, bathing the small sleeper compartment in soft yellow, revealing a folded blanket, a stainless steel thermos, and a small photo clipped near the dash. A smiling teenage girl in a softball uniform, sun hitting her braids as she held a bat over her shoulder. Monica's gaze lingered there for just a second before she looked forward again, the weight of long miles and responsibility settling quietly behind her calm expression. A shadow moved beside the driver's door, and then the beam of another flashlight slid across the side window, tapping once against the glass. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." The officer's voice was controlled, firm, but not hostile, the tone of someone used to being obeyed without question. Monica lowered the window halfway, the cool night air drifting in, carrying the faint scent of dust and diesel. "Evening, officer," she said calmly, her voice steady, measured, the kind of voice that carried composure instead of resistance. The officer, tall, broad-shouldered, his name tag catching the flashing lights, Reed Bennett. Deputy Kyle Bennett. He studied her for a moment, the light shifting across her face, across the reflective stripes of her work jacket, across the quiet interior of the cab. "License and registration," he said. Monica nodded slowly, reaching for the folder clipped beside her seat, careful, deliberate, every motion visible, her training long embedded in muscle memory even if she no longer wore a uniform. As she handed the documents down, she noticed another deputy circling toward the passenger side, his silhouette moving against the pulsing lights, while the third officer remained near the rear of the trailer, scanning quietly. The highway remained empty, no passing headlights, no distant engines, just the rhythmic flash of patrol lights painting the road in alternating color. Monica rested her hands loosely on the steering wheel again, her posture calm, her breathing even, but her eyes attentive, reading movement, distance, tone, everything unfolding in slow, careful detail. Deputy Bennett flipped through her paperwork, then looked back up at her, his expression neutral but assessing. "Mind telling me where you're headed tonight?" Monica met his gaze without tension, without hesitation. "Nashville. Delivery at 6:30 a.m. The wind moved gently across the open highway, the quiet stretching again, and somewhere in that stillness, the moment began to shift, subtle but unmistakable, like the road ahead just before the terrain changes. Deputy Bennett studied the paperwork under the pulsing lights, the plastic sleeve catching flashes of red and blue as he flipped each page with slow, deliberate movements, his partner now standing near the passenger side mirror, arms folded, posture guarded but quiet. Monica remained still, her hands resting lightly at 10 and 2 on the wheel, the cab light illuminating the calm lines of her face. Her breathing steady as the warm air inside the truck contrasted with the cool desert night drifting through the open window. Somewhere behind her, a freight train horn echoed faintly across the distant plains, long and low, blending into the stillness of the highway that seemed to stretch forever in both directions. Bennett glanced up again, his eyes scanning her commercial license, then the logbook, then the trailer manifest clipped behind it. "You have been driving a long shift," he said, not accusatory, not friendly, simply observant. Monica nodded once. 14 hours including stops. Still within federal limits. Her voice carried no tension, only quiet certainty. Bennett tilted his head slightly, then looked past her into the sleeper compartment, the beam of his flashlight briefly illuminating the folded blanket, the thermos, and the photograph clipped to the dash. He paused for a second longer than necessary before lowering the light again. The second deputy, Dawson, shifted his weight near the passenger side, glancing toward the third officer positioned farther back along the trailer, who was slowly walking the length of the refrigerated unit, his boots crunching softly along the gravel shoulder. The red and blue lights continued to cycle across the polished metal, reflecting in long streaks across the trailer doors and stretching across the pavement like moving shadows. "You know why we stopped you tonight?" Bennett asked. Monica met his gaze calmly. "No, sir. I do not." Bennett nodded slightly, then glanced back at her paperwork again, as if weighing something unspoken. "We received a call about a truck matching your description traveling through this corridor," he said, his tone careful, neutral. Monica listened quietly, her posture unchanged, her eyes attentive but relaxed. "Matching description?" she repeated softly. "Yes, ma'am." He closed the folder and tapped it lightly against his palm. Black cab, refrigerated trailer, late night route. Monica's gaze moved briefly toward the long stretch of empty highway behind the patrol vehicles, then back to him. "That describes half the trucks running interstate tonight." Bennett did not immediately respond. The wind brushed across the open fields again, carrying the faint hum of distant power lines and the occasional rustle of dry grass. Dawson stepped closer to the cab, his voice lower. "You mind if we take a quick look inside the trailer?" The request hung in the air, not aggressive, but firm enough to shift the tone. Monica's hands remained steady, her shoulders relaxed, but her eyes sharpened slightly, the calm awareness beneath her composure becoming more defined. "Is there a specific reason for the inspection?" she asked evenly. Dawson exchanged a brief glance with Bennett, then looked back at her. "Just routine." Monica remained silent for a moment, the ticking of cooling engine metal filling the quiet space between them. Her gaze drifted briefly to the dashboard clock glowing 12:47 a.m., then back to the officers. "My cargo is sealed and temperature regulated," she said calmly. "Delivery schedule is tight." Bennett watched her closely, his expression thoughtful, as if reassessing the tone of the encounter. Behind them, the third officer reached the rear doors of the trailer, his flashlight beam sliding across the locked seal and the refrigerated unit vents humming softly in the still air. Monica exhaled slowly, her calm never wavering, her presence grounded and steady as the night stretched quietly around them, and the moment settled into a deeper silence, the kind that comes when everyone senses that something more than a routine stop is about to unfold. The soft hum of the refrigerated unit continued behind Monica's cab as the third officer reached the trailer doors and paused, his flashlight beam resting on the intact seal, the plastic tag still unbroken and stamped with the shipping company logo. The night air felt cooler now, the desert temperature dropping slowly as the hours edged past midnight, and the flashing patrol lights painted slow-moving reflections across the polished steel panels. Deputy Bennett shifted his stance slightly, his boots pressing into the gravel shoulder as he studied Monica with a quieter, more measured expression. "You do not seem concerned," he said finally, his voice calm but probing. Monica met his gaze without hesitation. "I follow procedure," she answered, her tone steady and composed. "Concern usually comes when something is unclear." Dawson glanced toward Bennett, then back at Monica, his posture still guarded but less rigid than before. The silence stretched again, filled only by the faint hum of the refrigeration unit and the distant sound of wind brushing across the empty land. Bennett tapped the folder lightly against his palm, then looked back toward the rear of the trailer where the third officer remained standing, scanning the seal, the hinges, the locking bars, everything exactly as it should be. You run this route often? Bennett asked. Monica nodded slightly. Every other week. Produce out of Amarillo, delivery in Nashville, sometimes Memphis depending on the load. Bennett nodded slowly, absorbing the information, his eyes briefly drifting toward the long stretch of highway where no headlights appeared, the road empty in both directions. You live out of the truck? Dawson asked quietly, his tone less confrontational now, more curious than suspicious. Monica gave a faint nod. Most weeks. Home every few days when I can. Dawson's gaze flicked again toward the photo clipped near the dash, the softball uniform, the bright smile frozen in a moment of daylight far removed from the quiet tension of the roadside stop. Your daughter? He asked. Yes, Monica answered, her voice soft but steady. 14. Plays travel ball on weekends. Dawson nodded once, something in his posture easing slightly, the human detail softening the professional distance. Behind them, the third officer walked slowly back toward the cab, his flashlight now lowered, his steps measured and calm. He stopped beside Bennett and gave a small shake of his head, not dramatic, just subtle confirmation that everything at the rear looked normal. Bennett exhaled quietly, then turned his attention back to Monica, his expression thoughtful, as if reassessing the purpose of the stop. You mind stepping out of the vehicle for a moment? He asked, his tone now more procedural than assertive. Monica paused briefly, then reached for the door handle, her movements controlled and deliberate. She stepped down carefully from the cab, her boots touching the gravel shoulder, the cool night air brushing against her face as she straightened to her full height. The patrol lights flickered across her reflective jacket, across the calm set of her shoulders, across the steady composure in her eyes. She stood quietly beside the truck, hands relaxed at her sides, her posture balanced and grounded, the kind of stillness that carried quiet confidence without challenge. Bennett studied her again, closer now, noticing the details that had been less visible from the cab, the disciplined posture, the measured breathing, the calm presence that did not match the tension of the situation. The wind moved gently across the highway again, and in that quiet space, the moment shifted once more, subtle but undeniable, as if the night itself were holding its breath, waiting for something just beneath the surface to reveal itself. The gravel shifted softly under Monica's boots as she stood beside the truck, the towering trailer stretching behind her like a long silver wall reflecting the pulsing red and blue lights. Deputy Bennett stepped slightly closer, not invading her space, but close enough to observe more carefully, his gaze steady, professional, and quietly analytical. Dawson remained a few feet to the side, arms relaxed now, though his posture still carried the alertness of routine caution. The third officer lingered near the rear quarter of the cab, scanning the empty highway, as if expecting headlights that never came. The night felt wider now, the open land absorbing sound, leaving only the hum of the refrigeration unit and the faint ticking of cooling metal from the truck's engine. Bennett tilted his head slightly. How long have you been driving commercial? He asked. Monica answered without hesitation. 6 years. Her voice remained calm, grounded, neither defensive nor eager, simply factual. Bennett nodded slowly. Before that, the question hung in the air for a moment, quiet but deliberate. Monica's eyes moved briefly toward the horizon where the dark outline of distant hills blended into the sky. Different line of work, she said softly. Bennett studied her face, noticing the way she stood balanced on the gravel shoulder, her hands relaxed but steady, her breathing even despite the flashing lights and the late hour. You keep your composure well, Dawson said quietly, almost to himself. Monica gave a faint nod. Long nights teach you patience. The wind shifted again, brushing across the open highway, stirring the reflective strips on her jacket. Bennett's gaze moved downward briefly, noticing faint calluses along her hands, not just from steering wheels, but something older, something trained, disciplined. You travel alone most of the time? He asked. Yes, sir. Bennett nodded once more, then glanced toward the patrol vehicles behind them, the lights still flashing rhythmically against the empty interstate. The third officer stepped closer, his voice low. Dispatch confirmed no alerts on the vehicle. Bennett acknowledged with a small nod, then returned his attention to Monica, his expression softening just slightly, as though the tension that had framed the stop was beginning to ease. "We appreciate your cooperation," he said, but his tone suggested he was still evaluating, still piecing together details that did not quite align with a routine late-night stop. Monica stood quietly, her posture unchanged, her presence calm. In the shifting light, a passing gust of wind tugged gently at her sleeve, and she adjusted it slightly, a small, natural movement that exposed the edge of a worn wristwatch and the faint outline of a weathered band beneath it. Bennett's eyes flicked briefly toward the detail, then back to her face, his expression unreadable but thoughtful. Dawson shifted his stance, glancing again at the long stretch of empty road, the silence stretching deeper now that the immediate tension had begun to fade. Monica remained still, her composure steady, her eyes attentive, as if she sensed that the moment had not fully resolved yet. The refrigeration unit hummed steadily, the trailer lights glowing faintly red along its length, and the patrol lights continued to pulse against the darkness, casting long shadows across the gravel shoulder. Bennett inhaled slowly, then spoke again, his voice quieter now, more conversational. "You keep a tight schedule, Miss Hayes." Monica nodded once. "Delivery windows do not leave much room for delays." Bennett gave a small, understanding nod, but his gaze lingered for another moment, as if he was still searching for something just beneath the surface, something that explained the calm confidence standing before him. The highway remained empty, the night stretching wide and still, and in that silence, the encounter hovered in a quiet pause, as though the next moment would decide whether this stop ended as routine or became something more memorable for everyone standing beneath the flashing lights. The silence stretched longer than before, the kind that settled into the open highway and made every small sound feel louder. The hum of the refrigeration unit, the distant whisper of wind, the faint crackle of a police radio clipped to Dawson's shoulder. Deputy Bennett shifted his weight slightly, his boots scraping softly across gravel, his eyes still studying Monica with the quiet focus of someone trying to reconcile instinct with observation. "Ms. Hayes," he said calmly, "we are still going to need to verify a few things before you continue." His tone remained professional, but the decision subtly tightened the atmosphere again. Monica nodded once, her expression unchanged, her posture steady beneath the shifting lights. "What do you need to verify?" she asked evenly. Bennett glanced toward Dawson, then toward the patrol vehicle behind them. "Standard procedure. We would like to run a secondary check and confirm your route logs." Dawson stepped forward slightly, holding a small notepad, his movements measured and controlled. Monica listened quietly, her breathing steady, though her eyes sharpened just slightly, the calm awareness beneath her composure returning. "My logs are already submitted electronically," she said. "Carrier compliance system updates every 30 minutes. Bennett nodded, acknowledging her point, but his expression remained thoughtful. "Understood. Still, we will complete the check." The flashing lights reflected across Monica's watch face as she glanced briefly at the time, now approaching 1 in the morning, the minutes slipping quietly forward. The empty interstate stretched behind the patrol vehicles, still no headlights, still no movement, just the vast silence of open land. Dawson turned slightly, speaking into his radio in a low voice, requesting confirmation from dispatch. The words blended into static and short responses, the professional cadence of routine communication. Monica stood quietly, hands relaxed at her sides, her presence calm, her gaze drifting briefly toward the horizon before returning to the officers. The wind shifted again, brushing across her jacket, and she adjusted her sleeve slightly, revealing more of the worn band at her wrist, the edge of faded lettering barely visible beneath the light. Bennett noticed again, his eyes pausing there for just a second longer than before. "You said you have been driving 6 years," he said, his voice quieter now. Monica nodded. "Yes, sir. And before that?" The question returned, softer this time, less procedural, more curious. Monica's eyes held steady. "I worked overseas for a while," she answered calmly. Dawson finished his radio call and stepped back, nodding once toward Bennett. "Dispatch is running it now." Bennett acknowledged, then looked back at Monica, the pieces of the encounter shifting slowly in his mind, the calm demeanor, the disciplined posture, the measured responses. The night air cooled further, and somewhere far off, the faint glow of distant farm lights flickered along the horizon. Monica remained still, her breathing slow, her presence grounded, as if she had stood in far more uncertain places than a quiet roadside stop. The refrigeration unit hummed steadily behind her, the sealed trailer unchanged, the delivery still waiting miles ahead. Bennett folded his arms loosely, his posture less rigid now, yet still attentive. The silence deepened again, filled only by the low murmur of the radio and the rhythmic flash of patrol lights washing over steel and gravel. Monica stood calmly in that quiet, her eyes steady, her composure unbroken, as the moment stretched toward whatever came next, the night holding its breath while unseen information traveled through dispatch lines and returned with answers that would soon shift the tone of the roadside stop once again. The radio on Dawson's shoulder crackled softly, the sudden sound cutting through the stillness like a ripple across calm water, and all three officers instinctively shifted their attention toward the faint voice coming through the static. Dawson turned slightly away, pressing the speaker closer, listening carefully as dispatch responded in a calm, measured tone that blended into the hum of the night. Monica remained still, her hands resting loosely at her sides, her breathing slow and even as the flashing patrol lights painted alternating colors across her jacket and the gravel shoulder beneath her boots. Deputy Bennett watched her quietly, his expression thoughtful, as if he sensed the moment turning before the words even reached them. The wind moved again across the open interstate, carrying the faint scent of dry grass and warm asphalt cooling under the night sky, and somewhere far in the distance a truck engine rumbled faintly before fading back into silence. Dawson nodded once as dispatch finished speaking, then lowered the radio and stepped back toward Bennett, his voice low but clear enough to shift the atmosphere. Everything checks out. Clean record. Commercial logs verified. Carrier confirmed delivery route. Bennett nodded slowly, absorbing the confirmation, but his eyes remained on Monica, the calm composure in her posture still drawing his attention. Anything else? Bennett asked quietly. Dawson hesitated for a moment, then added, dispatch also flagged prior federal service. The words hung in the air, subtle but significant, and Bennett's gaze sharpened slightly, his posture straightening just a fraction. Federal service? He repeated softly. Dawson gave a small nod. That is all, dispatch said. No additional details. The night seemed to quiet further, as though the open land itself had paused to listen. Bennett turned his attention fully back to Monica, his voice calm, but more measured now. Ms. Hayes, dispatch indicates prior federal service. Is that correct? Monica met his gaze without hesitation, her expression calm, her posture unchanged. Yes, sir. Bennett studied her carefully, noticing again the disciplined stillness, the balanced stance, the steady breathing that did not match the fatigue of a 14-hour drive. What kind of service? He asked. Quietly. Monica paused for a brief moment, not evasive, simply thoughtful, her eyes drifting briefly toward the distant horizon before returning to him. Overseas assignments, she answered softly. Dawson exchanged a glance with Bennett, both officers sensing that the calm presence before them carried more depth than the simple words suggested. The refrigeration unit continued its steady hum behind them, the trailer lights glowing faintly red along the length of the vehicle, and the flashing patrol lights reflected across Monica's watch again as she adjusted her sleeves slightly against the cool air. Bennett's eyes followed the movement, and this time the worn band at her wrist became clearer, the faint outline of lettering catching briefly under the rotating lights. He did not comment immediately, but the details settled quietly in his mind. The highway remained empty, the night stretching wide and still, and Monica stood calmly in the center of the quiet roadside, her presence grounded and composed, as the tone of the encounter shifted subtly from routine verification to quiet recognition. The moment balanced delicately between curiosity and understanding while the distant horizon remained dark and silent beneath the slow sweep of passing clouds. Deputy Bennett's eyes settled again on the worn band at Monica's wrist, the faded fabric catching the sweep of red and blue light. And this time the lettering became clearer as she shifted slightly against the cool air, the stitched words partially visible beneath years of wear and sun exposure. He leaned forward just enough to read it, not intrusive, but attentive, the quiet professionalism in his posture now mixed with curiosity. The faint letters read in subdued thread, Special Operations Command, the edges softened by time. The band clearly not decorative but earned, carried, and kept long after its original purpose. Bennett's expression changed subtly, not dramatic, just a quiet recalibration, the kind that comes when a detail rearranges everything you thought you understood about a moment. "Ms. Hayes," he said gently, his tone now more respectful than procedural, "you served with Special Operations?" Monica met his gaze calmly, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steady, as if the question carried no weight beyond simple truth. "Yes, sir." Dawson shifted slightly beside him, the movement quiet but noticeable, his attention now more focused, the earlier tension replaced with quiet interest. "Army?" Bennett asked. Monica nodded once. "Yes, sir." The wind brushed across the highway again, lifting the edge of her jacket slightly, and the calm composure in her stance became even more apparent, her posture balanced, grounded, the kind of stillness shaped by years of disciplined environments. Bennett studied her for another moment, then asked softly, "What unit?" Monica paused briefly, not hesitant, simply measured, her eyes drifting toward the dark horizon before returning to him. "Delta Force," she answered quietly. The words landed without drama, without emphasis, but the effect was immediate, the air between them shifting in a way that needed no explanation. Dawson glanced at Bennett, his expression changing subtly, the professional familiarity with the name carrying quiet respect. The third officer, who had remained silent near the rear quarter of the cab, straightened slightly, his posture reflecting the same unspoken recognition. Bennett exhaled slowly, absorbing the information, his earlier assessment now aligning with the calm presence before him, the disciplined stillness, the measured speech, the awareness that had been evident from the moment she stepped out of the truck. "How long?" he asked quietly. 8 years, Monica replied, her voice even, her expression calm. Bennett nodded once, the respect in his posture now unmistakable, though he kept his tone professional. "That explains your composure tonight." Monica gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, the wind brushing softly across the gravel shoulder as the patrol lights continued their steady rhythm. The highway remained empty, the night wide and still, and the quiet understanding between them replaced the earlier uncertainty. Dawson folded his arms loosely, no longer guarded, his stance relaxed, as the significance of the moment settled into the calm roadside. Monica stood quietly, her presence unchanged, the same grounded stillness she had carried from the beginning, while the officers adjusted subtly, their posture reflecting recognition rather than suspicion. The refrigeration unit hummed steadily behind her, the sealed trailer waiting patiently for the miles ahead, and the flashing lights painted soft reflections across the truck as the encounter transformed into something quieter, more respectful, the tension replaced by understanding beneath the open night sky. Deputy Bennett stepped back slightly, the gravel shifting beneath his boots as the flashing lights reflected across Monica's truck, the atmosphere now noticeably calmer than it had been minutes earlier. The tension that once hovered over the roadside had softened into quiet respect, the kind that did not require words but settled naturally into posture and tone. Bennett cleared, his throat gently, his voice measured and sincere. "Ms. Hayes, we appreciate your patience tonight." Monica gave a small nod, her expression steady, her eyes calm beneath the soft glow of the patrol lights. "Just doing my job, sir," she replied quietly. Dawson shifted beside Bennett, glancing toward the long refrigerated trailer stretching into the darkness, then back toward Monica. "That is a long haul ahead of you," he said, his tone now conversational rather than investigative. Monica followed his glance briefly. "About 9 more hours with fuel and rest stops," she answered calmly. The third officer near the rear of the truck walked forward slowly, his posture relaxed, no longer scanning for irregularities, but simply standing beside the group as the quiet night settled again around them. The wind brushed softly across the open interstate, and somewhere far off, a faint set of headlights appeared on the horizon, distant and slow, a reminder that the highway never truly slept. Bennett nodded once, then handed Monica her documents, the motion deliberate and respectful. "Everything is in order," he said. "You are clear to continue." Monica accepted the folder, her movements calm and unhurried, the reflective stripes on her jacket catching the light as she turned slightly toward the cab. She paused for a brief moment, then looked back at the officers, her voice steady. "Thank you, officers. Stay safe tonight." The words carried no weight of tension, only quiet professionalism, the kind exchanged between people who understood long hours and unpredictable roads. Bennett gave a small nod in return. "You as well, Ms. Hayes." Dawson stepped back, allowing space as Monica reached for the door handle and climbed carefully into the cab, her boots settling onto the metal step with a soft echo. The interior light illuminated the small space again, the photograph clipped near the dashboard catching the glow, the softball uniform frozen in bright daylight far removed from the quiet midnight highway. Monica settled into the driver's seat, placed the folder beside her, and paused for a moment, her hands resting lightly on the wheel as she looked out through the windshield at the flashing patrol lights. The engine turned over with a deep, steady rumble, the vibration running gently through the cab as the truck came back to life. The refrigeration unit hummed in rhythm, the trailer lights glowing faintly behind her as she checked her mirrors. With practiced precision. Outside, the officers stepped farther back, their silhouettes framed by red and blue reflections as the massive truck eased forward slowly, gravel crunching beneath the tires. The long trailer followed in a smooth line, the polished steel catching the final flashes of patrol lights as Monica guided the truck back onto the open lane. The headlights stretched across the dark interstate, illuminating miles of empty road ahead. Bennett watched quietly as the truck gained speed, the red taillights gradually shrinking into the distance, the quiet hum of the engine fading into the vast night. Dawson folded his arms loosely, the earlier tension replaced by thoughtful silence. The patrol lights continued to pulse softly, reflecting across the empty highway, while the distant truck rolled steadily forward, disappearing into the open road beneath the calm, expansive sky. The highway stretched endlessly ahead as Monica guided the truck into a steady cruising speed, the dashboard lights glowing softly across her hands as the miles began to unfold again beneath the rolling tires. The red taillights of her trailer glowed faintly in the side mirrors, steady and calm, while the open road ahead reflected the quiet confidence she carried back into motion. The engine settled into a smooth rhythm, the low hum blending with the distant wind that swept across the wide plains, and the moment that had paused her journey slowly became another memory folded into the long chain of nights spent on American highways. Monica adjusted her grip lightly on the steering wheel, her movements deliberate and relaxed, the discipline of years guiding her posture even now, alone in the cab under the dark sky. The photograph clipped near the dashboard caught her attention again, the bright smile of her daughter frozen in sunlight, a quiet reminder of the reason she drove these long miles, the reason she kept moving forward no matter how late the hour or how quiet the road. She reached for the thermos beside her, taking a slow sip of lukewarm coffee, then set it back carefully, her eyes returning to the lane ahead as mile markers passed steadily one after another. Far behind her, the faint glow of patrol lights disappeared completely, swallowed by distance and darkness, leaving only the open interstate and the quiet rhythm of travel. Back on the shoulder, Deputy Bennett remained standing for a moment longer, watching the distant red lights shrink until they blended into the horizon. Dawson stepped beside him, his arms folded loosely, his posture thoughtful. "She handled that calmly," Dawson said quietly. Bennett nodded once, his gaze still fixed on the empty stretch of road. "Some people carry experience differently," he replied, his voice low, reflective. The third officer walked back toward the patrol vehicles, the gravel crunching softly beneath his boots, and the red and blue lights began to slow, their intensity fading as Bennett reached toward the control panel and switched them off. The sudden darkness felt deeper, the highway returning to its natural quiet, the night sky stretching wide above them, with scattered stars faintly visible between drifting clouds. Dawson glanced once more down the road. "You would not have guessed at first," he said softly. Bennett gave a faint nod. "No, but sometimes you notice it. The way someone stands, the way they speak, the calm." The wind moved across the empty interstate again, brushing gently across the shoulder as the officers returned to their vehicles, the quiet of routine settling back into place. Meanwhile, miles ahead, Monica's truck continued steadily forward, the headlights carving a path through the darkness, illuminating the reflective lines of the interstate stretching far into the distance. She adjusted her mirrors once more, the long trailer following smoothly behind her, her posture relaxed yet attentive, her breathing slow and even as the night rolled on. The sky above remained vast and silent, the road unfolding mile by mile beneath her wheels, and the quiet hum of the engine carried her forward into the distance, leaving behind flashing lights, quiet recognition, and a roadside moment that faded gently into the stillness of the American night.